Good evening, everyone. And as usual, as most streamers do, I start by introducing myself. All right, it looks like, as usual, we're having tech issues, and I don't know how long I was out. So I don't know if it's because the cat pulled the cord, but it might have. Let us start all over again because I don't know how much was missed. I am the Mad Computer Scientist. We cover math and computer science topics here. I'm a proud member of Mad Computer Scientist Local number 29A. On this computer channel, we cover math and computer science topics, but occasionally I like to cover bad logic or things that I think are bad logic as well. And on this show called Faulty Logic Fridays, that's what we try to do here. But before we begin tonight's stream, we're going to do some error corrections from the Dr. Jason Lyle stream. Now, if you're going to look for this stream on the channel, I'm going to have to inform you that that stream was taken down. Why was it taken down? Well, I accidentally showed a Discord screen at the end, and I didn't want anyone to accidentally be doxxed, and it was too hard to edit out. Give me a second here while I close that. Now, we are going to share a screen that goes over the correction I need to make. Give me a second here. And we're going to turn Share System Audio on because I always forget that one. So in this case, the error had to do with me misapplying the Mandelbrot set and forgetting to add a 1 at the end because our initial C value was 1. Now, if our initial C value is 1, in this recursive relation, the values we will get if we go through it are initially 1, then 2, then 5, then 26, then 677. I thought Dr. Jason Lyle had made a mistake by multiplying 26 times 26 and getting an odd number. He was actually performing the calculation correctly. Now, for a computer scientist to make an off by 1 error is not anything new. We do it all the time. However, I would be amiss if I did not correct myself. Before we get into tonight's stream, which is going to be about answers in Genesis, probably misunderstanding that DNA is not a computer code, I want to ask everyone for a favor. I have a feeling that I might be getting stuck in a rut on this one, and if you have any topics you would like to cover, ones that aren't necessarily religion or politics related, give your suggestions below. If you have any other math or computer science topics you'd like me to cover, please put those links in the comments. Now, let us get started on the video. And let me make sure I'm in the right area. We're going to have to stop sharing the screen for a little bit and close the PowerPoint slide. Give me a second, because we don't need PowerPoint at the moment and we don't need to save like Windows is trying to get me to do. Now we're going to full screen this, and we're going to share the video, and hopefully we will have sound. One more second here. There we go. Oh, there's another error. I can see that we. I apologize, everyone. The sound should have been set normally, along with the speed. And why would we get that incredulous look? We're not that far away from being able to make robots that can make themselves. However, what we can see where Answers in Genesis is heading here is an argument from incredulity fallacy. They're trying to imply. I apologize, the mic cord came unplugged again. I really need to fix that. I really need to get the cord. What Answers in Genesis is trying to imply is basically an argument from incredulity fallacy. They don't believe that the universe could have created itself because robots can't create themselves, so we also have a false analogy fallacy coming here. We are going to skip ahead a little bit because I don't really care about their music or their high quality intro, so we can get back to where they're actually speaking again. And I'm sure their use of micro machines there was absolutely not because they've forgotten that there was a toy from the late 80s, early 90s that were just little like matchbox cars called micro machines. I can't imagine why something that is in fact science and is an observable fact would be treated as both science and fact. That's a mystery to me, and I'm sure the great scientist at Answers in Genesis will be answering it soon. I Oh, so we can see that fallacy. Okay, this is a well-known point that Answers in Genesis and the Discovery Institute has never gotten right. Let me just double check something here. What they're trying to do is an irreducible complexity argument. I'm sorry, I did not quite have time to watch this thoroughly before I started tonight because this was the last day of the college semester. I'm a grad student. My brain is more than a little fried because I took a very hard test, but at least I've had some time to recover. In this case, they're going to try to tell you that the flagellar motor, which isn't even really a motor if you ask a biologist, but rather a complex chemical structure, would not work if the pieces were reduced in any way. Now, if you followed the Kitzmiller versus Dover or wanted to look it up, the Frontline documentary is available online. You will find out that this argument is invalid because before the necessary protein developed, the pathway that would produce the flagellar motor, which they're incorrectly using, actually functioned as a I can't pronounce the word, secretary system. And I can't even believe they're trying to trot this out again. And we all know Asimov would have famously agreed with creationists and didn't spend most of his career mocking them. You know, you think I'd stop doing that, but apparently I'm not going to stop doing that anytime soon. So we have to stop the screen and we have to go back. Give me a second. Eventually I'm going to get these right, and that's going to be scary.
Electrons as a source of illumination. And what's discovered
Can you guys hear the video now?
inside the simplest of living things is astounding indeed. As PhD geneticist Michael Denton described, to grasp the reality of life as it has been revealed by molecular biology, we must magnify a cell 1,000 million times until it's 20 kilometers in diameter and resembles a giant airship large enough to cover a great city like London or New York. What we would then see would be an object of unparalleled complexity and adaptive design.
All right, the argument from complexity has flaws all of its own. An unspoken argument for complexity that they often don't seem to realize is that the more complex something is, the more likely it is to need a creator. The problem with this is that more complex designs are indicative of a bad creator, especially if they're unnecessarily complex. A good example I can think of for this is the Hello World program that many computer scientist students write as one of their introductions to a new programming language. Now, the most famous incarnation of this in most languages has a runtime complexity of O of 1, which means it runs the same amount of time every time, although the amount of time it takes may vary depending on the language you use. Now, I can rewrite the Hello World program so it uses a for loop to print out one letter at a time. Instead of an O1 or constant time complexity, I then have a complexity of O of n, or linear. Does this mean that the more complex program is better? No, it's actually worse programming design. So I kind of wish they would drop the unspoken assumption that more complexity means better, but that's generally not what they're saying. They're saying complexity requires a more intelligent creator, and that's not necessarily the case. What they don't realize they're saying is that God is a bad designer.
On the surface of the cell, we would see millions of openings, like the portholes of a vast spaceship, opening and closing to allow a continual stream of materials to flow in and out. If we were to enter one of these openings, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity. Now,
I believe there are plenty of people who have pointed out that Michael Denton, I'm going to Google him secondly, but I believe he's a creationist, and this book is not a good scientific source. It is from a creationist organization. Give me a few seconds while I Google that, and you will hear some mechanical keyboard in the background, and I'm sorry I can't help that. Let's see who the publisher is. Publisher is Brinkley. no, that's not it. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say about it. All right, so it argues that the theory of evolution by natural selection is a theory in crisis. And of course, it's endorsed by the Discovery Institute, a well-known and highly productive scientific organization that has given us many discoveries, such as irreducible complexity, which hasn't been thoroughly debunked in the court of law, as well as in science long before it came to a head in my home state in the Kitzmiller versus Dover court trial.
Part of that bewildering complexity is our topic of conversation, kinesin. Kinesin proteins aren't living things. Rather, they're a family of miniature motor proteins inside living things.
You mean proteins aren't themselves living things? Next, you're going to tell me in DNA computing, DNA, which acts as storage, isn't actually Turing complete, but the DNA computing system is.
Things that transport cargo around inside cells and are remarkably humanoid in appearance. Having two legs that allow them to walk along roadways inside cells and two arms that allow them to carry packages full of important cargo, they're like the postal delivery people, but on a mind-bogglingly microscopic scale. At only 7 billionths of a meter long, they consist of, utilize, and synchronize with an incredibly complex array of microbiotechnology that...
Okay, no, they don't. Technology is not created by natural processes. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the word. I get why they're using it that way. They're trying to make it sound like it's designed. But technology are things we create. They're processes we create. They're tools we create. Nothing created by nature using natural processes is a technology.
Rivals the most sophisticated feats of engineering that humans have ever achieved. Now, there are many different types of kinesin and kinesin-related proteins, each with different specifications and functions that have been discovered in various organisms from yeast to humans. But the following example is a very basic scientific description of what a typical kinesin does and why it does it.
Oh, and I'm sure a microbiologist would not be able to pick this apart much better than I could. And I'm sure they won't be misrepresenting anything.
Inside life forms, proteins and other needed parts must be delivered to specific places within the cell at precise times. Now, if the needed part is a protein, for example, a manufacturing plant called a ribosome receives blueprints for the part from the nucleus. The information is stored in the nucleus on a strand of DNA.
And this is just another pet peeve of mine, but will you define information, please? Usually when I hear creationists say that, they switch between different definitions. So what we have here is likely going to be an equivocation fallacy, or they'll use the definition of information that comes from information theory and switch between the definition of information that comes from informatics and then switch to just a generic definition of information that just means any DNA. However, generally, when they use this analogy, they're trying to compare it to informatics. And if they're going to use informatics, information is something that is processed from data. So DNA, in that particular analogy, is not information, it is data, and the protein expression would be the information.
DNA, but the blueprint is sent in the form of an RNA copy of that section of the DNA. Now, this is obviously a complex coordinated effort, as something must first access the creature's DNA library, unzip it at the exact location needed to copy the specific information required for whatever part is to be manufactured, create a copy of the information for the part, and deliver it to the factory. Afterwards, another organelle in the cell, called the Golgi apparatus, packages the needed part and wraps it in a bag called a vesicle, then imprints the address where the part is to be delivered onto the outside of the parcel.
Address?
Then a kinesin is summoned, and as mentioned, a typical kinesin has two arms on one end.
They're trying to make this sound like it's a coordinated effort. It's not. It's all determined by the laws of chemistry.
Holding the cargo, the vesicle, and two legs on the other end that walk along the roadway called a microtubule. So it picks up the parcel and walks along microtubules in the cell and delivers the parcel where it's needed. Now, if that sounded like a lot of technobabble to you,
Why would it describing how packages are delivered sound like technobabble? Or are you referring to all the technical terms I don't have enough information to know if you're misusing, and I suspect neither do you.
let's use a more relatable scenario that, although sophisticated, actually pales in comparison to what kinesin regularly do, so that we can better understand the level of complexity at which these micromachines interact and operate among the other systems inside cells.
Because we all know the level of complexity at which something happens determines whether or not the process used to get the thing done is intelligent. No, it doesn't.
Now, imagine a fellow named Joe is working at his job one day when suddenly the machine he's operating breaks down. After doing a diagnostic to determine what happened, he identifies a broken part and makes a call from a cell phone to a local manufacturer in his contact list, requesting the needed component and giving them the part number. The manufacturer takes the order and records Joe's address. However, although they have a list of all the part numbers on hand, they don't have the schematic required to manufacture it. So they send an email to another company that has the copy of all the blueprints for every part needed in the industry, requesting the needed diagram. So someone there makes a photocopy of the needed section from the master database and delivers it back to the manufacturer. And now, having the instructions to construct Joe's needed part, the factory then constructs it, puts it in a package, marks.
If, by the way, you're keeping track of the logical fallacies used, I have a feeling this is a false analogy.
With the postal address from its database and calls a courier company to send a delivery person. After arriving at the factory and acquiring the package, the courier punches in the GPS coordinates and travels along the route plotted to deliver the package to the proper address so that Joe can get on with his day. And voila, mission accomplished. Now, most would agree that the level of complexity, both in the engineering and
Again, how are you measuring complexity? In my earlier example, I can actually tell you how I'm measuring complexity. That's by the number of instructions it took to run the Hello World program. Every time they use this argument, they can never tell us how they're measuring complexity. I've even had one person suggest it was blobs. Now, I don't know what he meant by blobs, but apparently in cells, the measure of complexity is measured by blobs.
manufacturing prowess combined with the multi-tiered levels of coordinated communication and interaction that I just described in my analogy is pretty impressive. Not simply the technology, the communication systems, or the manufacturing capability and the databases combining these integrated components, but also the specialized knowledge required at each step along the way, beginning with Joe.
Kinesin is a protein that exists within our cells, does not have specialized knowledge, nor does anything in the cell.
Performing the troubleshooting analysis of his broken machine, all the way to the admin person's insight about which area of the metadatabase to access. Truly.
Metadatabase? Do you just mean the database? I don't think you know what metadata is. Metadata would be data about the data, so it would be a database about the data in the database, which I'm sure actually does exist, but I don't think you used the term you meant.
Such intricately synchronized problem solving would be considered close to peak level human sophistication. And of course, in our example, all of these steps were coordinated by intelligent people at every stage. Well, as impressive as that may have been, let's understand.
Well, I can think of one thing that was a very complex process that clearly wasn't coordinated by intelligent people at every stage, and that's almost every production by Answers in Genesis.
You can never see anything enter a black hole.
Right, let's fix that. That should not have happened.
Numbers on hand, They don't have that I just described in my analysis. And of course, in our example, all of these steps were coordinated by intelligent people at every stage. Well, as impressive as that may have been, let's understand that the actual processes involving kinesin are far more
I will be willing to help you with that, Titan.
impressive than what Joe experienced. And all of the programming involved was, according to advocates of the story of evolution, supposed to have been generated via random mechanistic process over millions.
Wait, programming? I'm sure this may come as a shock to you, but organic chemistry is not programming. I spent a good portion of the semester trying to come up with a program to come up with stats for FASTA files. Now, this was just data about the DNA of certain human genes, and we had to go through those DNA to find certain strings and substrings. That is absolutely not the organic chemistry. In fact, all we're doing is a simple search of strings of data to come up and find a match with what we need. That is not what is happening in the human cell.
Millions of years, all without any intelligence behind it. However, just think about the implications we've gone over here.
That you don't know what you're talking about?
The fact that cells are somehow able to know when and where a specific part is needed inside of themselves requires an incredibly sophisticated diagnostic system.
You know, I'm not an expert on chemistry, but I think that these are just things that happen according to the way the molecules are made. These systems evolved to fulfill the requirements of a certain chemical reaction.
It also requires a database of all of the parts that may be stored and the ability to access them at the appropriate times when the correct.
Oh my gosh. Because showing the server farm is actually the database itself. I don't even think that's a server farm. I think that's just an area of screens that someone had computer generated.
Specific communication is activated through the system. That communication then must trigger the access of a blueprint for the needed part and the assembly and packaging of it, along with the recording of some type of address for the kinesin to access and utilize in order to travel to the correct destination.
Or there are certain chemical connections that have to happen, or whatever they're called, that the kinesin will be able to complete once it gets to where it's needed.
Just as an address is useless to us without some sort of map or GPS system of the location. However, the more we discover, the more mind-blowing it gets.
Wait, what? Since when are there addresses in cells? Are you trying to say that chemicals in cells are used as signals? I don't know if that's what you're trying to say, but I don't think you know it either. You're trying to make this sound impressive, and it probably is really impressive, but you're trying to make it sound like a sophisticated manufacturing operation and that someone programmed specific parts of it, and that's just not what happens. DNA is not a programming language. As far as I know, DNA isn't even Turing complete. I have my doubts about whether the Answers in Genesis staff that produced this video are Turing complete.
That's just the kinesin proteins themselves.
Just for the record, everyone, YouTube automatically gave Titan a wrench. It's a tight YouTube law that if Titan is in your channel, he automatically gets a wrench.
Function with incredible,
or did I just use the wrong pronoun?
Efficiency. A kinesin's motor produces nearly 15 times more power than most man-made engines, and is nearly twice as.
Wait, what? I don't think they actually do. I think this is a scale you're trying to compare it to. And you're trying to say if the kinesin engine, which isn't an engine, were the same size as a human engine, it would produce 15 times more power and be twice as efficient.
As efficient as a gasoline engine. In addition, kinesin are extremely fast, moving at a rate of 100 steps per second. And if we were to somehow scale up a kinesin to my height, it would move approximately 600 meters per second, over 2,000 kilometers per hour. As Stephen M.
Oh, good, big scary numbers. I wonder if they're going to make some probability and statistics errors later too.
Block from the Department of Molecular Biology at Princeton University said, scaled up to our own dimensions, a motor with corresponding properties would travel at similar speeds and produce as much horsepower per unit weight as the jet engines of the thrust supersonic car, which recently broke the sound barrier.
Okay, did everyone else catch that? Scaled up to our own dimensions, which means it doesn't actually produce that power. Could it be possible that answers in Genesis being dishonest? Or being misleading, even if they're not intending to be dishonest?
Incredibly, kinesin also have what would be considered a bypass mode ability that allows them to navigate around obstructions that they might encounter while delivering packages. And similar to how a GPS system recomputing mode will calculate an alternate route should obstructions arise, kinesin have demonstrated the remarkable ability to reroute around obstructions when needed. Of course, this not only demonstrates programming of the kind that computer science describes as conditional statements, illustrated.
Could you please pick one field of science to be wrong about? This does not demonstrate programming, but yes, if it did describe programming, you would be describing what is known as branching statements, of which the if-then-else construct is one of them. The other more popular, or one, used for one variable comparison is the switch statement. If you're going to use an assembly language, you have multiple conditionals you can use, but none of them are if-then-else or switch.
By an if-then-else construct common to most programming languages, i.e., if an obstruction, then reroute. It also means that they...
Or maybe it's not an if-then-else statement, it's just, if they can't go a certain way, they have to go another way. I mean, it's really not that hard. When water encounters an obstacle that it can't move, it's not going to decide, I'm going to go around it. It's just going to go around it. Didn't require any programming, it's just straight physics.
It can somehow determine alternate routes through some type of program operating in the background that can provide the most efficient path available. And no one yet knows what exactly that program is or how it works.
Could that be because it doesn't exist?
Kinesin proteins also coordinate their efforts should the task at hand be too much for just one of them to complete. Like runners in a relay race, kinesin sometimes hand off their cargo to a fresh worker after bringing it a certain distance. And if the cargo to be transported isn't just a one-man job, so to speak, multiple kinesin will join and pull the load together. And however mundane a simple delivery service may seem, research has shown that kinesin do far more than so-called grunt work. Among their most important functions are the support of cell division and transporting neurotransmitters needed for neurons to communicate with one another. Some kinesin dismantle microtubules, and since controlling microtubule length is vitally important during cell division, as it can cause chromosome instability, which is linked to human cancer, their work is very important indeed. As one researcher said, if kinesin were to fail altogether, you wouldn't even make it to the embryo stage because your cells wouldn't survive. It's that important. And kinesin are powered by the universal energy compound known as ATP.
Oh my gosh. Pretty much everything in the human cell is powered by ATP. How is this surprising? This is like high school level biology. It's not amazing.
Which is produced by another engineering marvel inside all living things, ATP synthase, the molecular motor. Every molecule of ATP absorbed by kinesin allows it to take a step. And without the ATP synthase motors, there'd be no way for the kinesin robot to function, which adds yet another extraordinary level of complexity to the.
Oh my gosh, all these levels of complexity. It must mean God did it. No, it just means that when you build things from the bottom up, you will get increasing complexity. Sometimes that increasing complexity leads to systems that no intelligent designer would make, or convoluted processes that could be streamlined if an intelligent designer were to actually take a look at it.
Processes involved. Cells are also extremely efficient, and this is remarkably illustrated by how kinesin have a hibernation feature and enters an auto-inhibited state when not in use. Similar to how modern computers shut down after a period of inactivity, kinesin fold over and enter into a.
Computers do not automatically shut down after a period of inactivity unless you tell them to do so. And they don't really shut down. They go into a low power mode, which is generally referred to as hibernation or sleep mode. My laptop does this all the time. If I want to actually turn the laptop off, most of the time I either have to let the battery run out or actually just actively turn the laptop off.
Sleep mode when cargo isn't attached to prevent ATP from being wasted. When needed, they reactivate somehow and carry on with whatever new task they've been assigned. There's also good evidence that they're either dismantled and recycled or transported in groups back to the center of the cell by large transport units, much like how buses, streetcars, or subway trains shuttle groups of people around in cities when they're done with their tasks. Now, let's just be honest. If any scientist were somehow able to design such incredible microtechnology, they would likely receive the highest possible accolades and be the recipient of the most prestigious awards available from the scientific community.
I have no idea where the state of nanotechnology and microtechnology, which he called it, is, but I have a feeling if they designed something like most biological processes and could not make them simpler, this would not happen. Many other scientists and engineers would be racing to design better processes.
But of course, no scientist has even come close. And yet scientists have minds. Nature doesn't. So unless nature could display the capability to construct such marvels, would it not be more logical to invoke our Creator as the source of these?
Would it be more logical? No, it wouldn't. Because we don't have any proof that there's a creator for these things. We know they can evolve naturally. We have a good idea how they evolve naturally. Everything you're comparing them to are human built. They are things we made.
But in a culture with an education system committed to naturalism, God is never given the glory for such marvelous creations. It's the story of evolution that supposedly explains such nanotechnology.
Stop calling it nanotechnology and maybe get some sleep. You look like you've been up all night. Perhaps, like I was, trying to get a chess program working because you had a professor that just could not understand he was giving too much homework.
It is impressive how nature manages to combine all of these functions in one molecule. In this respect,
I really wish I could look this up on the fly pretty easily, because I would not be surprised if there's more than one quote mine from non-creationist sources.
it is still far superior to all the efforts of modern nanotechnology and serves as a great example to us all. Of course, naturalists typically appeal to the concept of deep time to explain away such marvelous constructs.
As if deep time were the only explanation for this. Listen, neither you or I probably have the time to look up all the papers for this, and right now I'd rather look up papers to see how close they're getting to solving the P versus NP problem. But honestly, I'm thinking this video is an interesting demonstration of the halting problem, where we don't get to see how you're going to stop being stupid, or if you're going to be stopped being stupid, until the video ends if it ends.
The materialist's mantra is simple to complex over millions of years, repeated ad nauseum. This is their typical modus operandi for explaining away the incredible complexity continuously being revealed by modern scientific techniques.
This is also an interesting thing that I don't know why they keep doing this. It's like even our machinery goes from simple to complex. It just doesn't evolve. We evolve more complex machinery over time. But we usually don't end up with needless systems unless we're doing something like software, where new features get added and just the old ones may get forgotten, leading to the bloated operating systems like Microsoft Windows or the Linux desktop environment GNOME.
By declaring that all things, no matter how miraculous they might seem, are possible with enough time, naturalists brandish the wand of deep time with impunity, waving away all criticisms of the story of evolution that appeal to.
Why are they just all copies of The Origin of Species? I mean, I'm glad you found a book that wasn't the Bible, but there's tons of more on evolution. I have a biology textbook in there that can bring you more up to date than The Origin of Species ever could, and my biology textbook is out of date because that was written over 10 years ago.
Examples of design. Now, this is a terrible argument, of course.
In that we are in agreement. This argument is a terrible one you are using.
Our experience, even with intelligent input and upkeep, things get worse over time, not better. However, the problem for them in this case is that the more they research, the more they run out of time.
An individual item gets worse over time, not necessarily things. It seems that you're trying to misapply entropy, and I'm sure any number of physicists have already taken you to task on that one.
Why? Well, originally, kinesin were thought to be only in the cells of organisms with a nucleus, eukaryote cells. But evolutionists' best guesses of when first life, consisting of so-called simple prokaryote cells, appeared on Earth is around 3.8 to 4.3 billion years ago. As
I love how you call it a best guess as if it weren't confirmed by multiple independent lines of input.
Evolutionists believe that eukaryote cells evolved well over 2 billion years ago. That meant such incredibly...
I'm going to have to ask a biologist about that one, because unless I'm mistaken, the process of eukaryotic cells wasn't so much evolving so much as it was a bacterium merging that gave us mitochondria. Oh, come on, don't do... All right, there we go. I'm going to go back a little bit and...
appeared on Earth is around 3.8 to 4.3 billion years. Appeared in life very early on indeed. In less than or just over half of the supposed time life was on Earth. How could such marvels appear so quickly after evolution supposedly began? And if trying to explain...
Wait. So, 6,000 years is enough time for us to get all the species we have today, actually significantly less, because most of you actually believe there was some form of hyper macro evolution that occurred after the Ark landed. But somehow several billion years wasn't enough for it. I think you may want to work on the logical contradiction there.
Explain that type of sophistication in such a short time wasn't enough of a headache. Researchers now propose that types of kinesin must have appeared prior to eukaryotes, in what researchers call the last common eukaryotic ancestor, the LCEA, which means they must have come into existence even earlier on in the deep time framework. As one researcher put it, a large proportion...
Yes, that's the way binary decisions work. Usually either something did happen or it didn't. If it didn't come into existence later in the timeline, it came into existence earlier.
Of the extant diversity of the kinesin superfamily was already established before the radiation of eukaryotes from the last known eukaryote ancestor. And now new research
And why are you not pronouncing eukaryote correctly?
has revealed a kinesin type within bacteria, which, according to the story of evolution, evolved 3.5 billion years ago. A eubacterial homologue of a kinesin light chain gene has been isolated and characterized from the cyanobacterium Plectonema boreanum. But that would mean complex features like kinesin were here from at least very near the beginning of life, according to their imagined evolutionary timescale. Again, this is biotechnology far.
Well, this isn't technically a fallacy here, but we did have something interesting occur there. Have you noticed how he's been using a certain type of language to paint evolutionary theory? This is a technique known as poisoning the well.
Far superior to anything the most intelligent scientific minds on the planet have ever produced, which is likely why evolutionists have suggested, without any observable evidence, that perhaps these bacteria were simply given this genetic software package at a much later date via.
And certainly my blood pressure is not rising every time you refer to this as a software package. Certainly that hasn't annoyed me about people like Atangelo and logical, probable, plausible.
Lateral gene transfer.
Of course, Stephen Meyer makes the same mistake too, so it's not surprising you guys are doing it.
After it had evolved elsewhere. Bible believers can be confident in the fact that kinesin were truly here from the beginning, as the Word of God says.
Can someone in the chat please point out where in the Bible it says kinesin was here from the beginning? I don't remember that, and I could bring up my Bible on my iPad here, but...
For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Exodus 20, verse 11. Which, of course, would include kinesin. The commonly taught
What it now?
evolutionary story that simple life evolved into more complex.
Because kinesin, even if your story were true, could have evolved after he created that.
Forms is simply false. True science is based on observation, and what we've observed.
Something as complex as the science of evolution cannot be reduced to a simple Boolean decision. Not even the Bible itself can be reduced to that. Now, some claims about the Bible can be. For example, if we claim the Bible is inerrant, that can be reduced to a simple Boolean decision. Because if we find one error in the Bible, we simply have proven the Bible is not inerrant because we found a contradiction to the Bible being inerrant. That's all it takes.
Observed is that there's no such thing as a simple life form. Because even the simplest creatures that we.
Unless I'm mistaken, when biologists use the term simple life form, they don't actually mean it's simple in the normal sense. They mean it's simple compared to other forms of life.
We've seen aren't simple at all. What we have observed is life.
Unless, of course, they work for this organization.
Forms that range from mind-blowingly complex to a level of sophistication that's virtually inconceivable in terms of brilliant design and functional ability.
Really brilliant design? If the person who designed my ankles was brilliant, I would like to have a word with him and see his IQ test.
Evolutionists believe that in the past there were simpler life forms that existed other than what we observe today, which are not simple in any true sense of the word. They believe that.
I see. Among the fields of study you don't necessarily understand, apparently language is one of them. The word simpler does not mean simple. It simply means more simple than the later life forms that evolved. Please learn how to use comparative adjectives. It'll help you in the future.
That on faith, not facts. And common sense tells us that when we see robots in factories or communication devices such as smartphones that can connect to the internet, share information through vast and diverse networks, GPS systems that required countless hours of data collecting and utilization through sophisticated state-of-the-art satellite systems, etc. In our everyday life, they're always the result of intelligent design.
You mean things that were made by humans are always the result of intelligent design because humans made them? That's an amazing discovery. So let's extend that logic further, that things that are made by nature, which you admitted earlier doesn't have a mind, are not the result of intelligent design because they occurred naturally. So it seems, whether you realize or not, we're actually in agreement. Natural systems are not intelligent design, but human systems are. Thank you for confirming what we already knew.
And yet, as a culture in the West, we've been feeding our children into indoctrination centers for decades now.
Of course, we have to get a slam in at public schools and universities, because universities always turn everyone liberal. And that's how we get well-known liberals like Jordan Peterson.
And these institutions have been teaching young minds, in contradiction to all human experience, that a no-mind process, evolution, can produce far more sophisticated technology than what the most...
How about not calling it no mind? How about calling it directed and undirected? The human processes are directed. Natural processes are undirected. It doesn't necessarily mean they're random. It just means that they're more likely to be results of their environment.
most brilliant scientists on the planet have ever achieved, and that somehow matter arranged itself into minds that have determined matter is in fact better at creating constructs than we will ever be.
When did we determine that? I mean, I'm not even going to tell you we will never prove God. It's just unlikely with our current state of being we will be able to do it in my lifetime. Now, it's possible someone may come up with a way to provide good evidence for God that's verifiable and, more importantly, falsifiable. It's just that the way organizations like Answers in Genesis typically define God is unfalsifiable, and that just puts it outside of the realm of science.
As Jack Szostak, an evolutionist from Harvard Medical School, admitted, we aren't smart enough to design things. We just let evolution do the hard work, and then we figure out what happened.
I have a feeling this is a huge quote mine that has been taken greatly out of context.
Now, are we supposed to believe that this is logical, reasonable, or rational to any degree whatsoever? No. When we see comparable, yet even more sophisticated things inside the so-called simplest living things on the planet, it's a...
Listen, if you want to continue your argument for incredulity, that's up to you, but maybe you should find a different organization to work for. Clearly you're not getting enough sleep. I can see it in your face. Maybe you're being kept up awake at night by knowing you're not telling the truth.
a logical conclusion to believe that the incredible creator God of the Bible, Jesus Christ, is the wonderful mastermind behind all that we experience. Christians.
Oh, great. Is this going to devolve into a come to Christ moment?
Don't ever let anyone tell you that your faith is irrational, illogical, or not scientifically supported. Non-Christians, take an honest...
I am not going to bother to tell Christians or non-Christians that either. I think most reasonable people know that faith, at least in the religious context, isn't rational. But humans believe a lot of irrational things that help them through their day.
Just look at the evidence from science and scripture. The story of evolution is simply not scientifically tenable whatsoever.
If you believe the story of evolution is not scientifically tenable, you seriously need to take a biology course, because even a simple biology course will let you know that there's so much of modern biology that we know that just doesn't work unless what we know about evolution is true.
According to what we observe in nature. even in something like that quirky kinesin crawling around inside of you right now. The fact is, what we see in God's world is what we see in His Word. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world.
There is nothing that's going to convince me more than a Bible quote that probably isn't even about kinesin.
In the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. Romans 1, verse 20.
Okay. Well, apparently someone missed the point of this, but that's okay. These don't have to be for everyone, and there's going to be other content on the channel that isn't going to be live streams. That isn't going to be this. Scott, I'm sorry it didn't work for you, but there are certainly other YouTube channels for you out there. Okay, so that was Answers in Genesis. We're going to stop sharing the screen now. Now, if you have any content you would like me to cover on Faulty Logic Fridays, please leave a comment below. Now that the finals for grad school are over, I plan to be returning to more of the content I actually want to do on this channel, which will be more math and computer science related. I have one coming up on the halting problem. And I'll probably do some more simple math tutorials for people who have forgotten high school algebra. Now, this is an older video, and I'm going to ask you to remember that the people in this video are still people. The snarky comments are just to provide some entertainment. Hopefully I'll get better at this as things go on. But as usual, there are always technical issues, and I'm somewhat out of practice since I did it the last time. With that being said, just remember that the people covered here are still people, and the comments are just to provide entertainment to what is otherwise relatively dry content. Go forth, everyone, and write some interesting code.